Apologies for that stray tool call, ignoring it and moving straight into the script. Hello, and welcome back to Natural Word English. If this is your first time here, this is the channel where you don't just learn English words, you learn to actually use them in the exact moments of your real life where they matter most. My name is Chloe, and I'll be your guide for the next hour or so. Today's lesson is built around a very specific, very human moment, that tiny gap of silence right before you speak. That half second where your mind goes blank, your mouth opens, and nothing comes out. If you've ever felt that, you are not alone. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why it happens. And more importantly, you're going to have 25, 30, even 60 new advanced English words that will help you close that gap for good. This is not a video full of theory. This is a video full of real vocabulary used in real situations, the way native speakers actually use it at work, in interviews, in meetings, in everyday conversations. So grab a notebook, put your headphones on, and let's get started. Let's talk about that pause for a second, because I think it deserves a proper introduction. You know the moment. Someone asks you a question in English, maybe in a meeting, maybe at a job interview, maybe just a friend asking what you think about something, and suddenly your brain freezes. You know the answer. You understand the question perfectly, but the words won't come. That pause isn't a sign that your English is bad. It's actually a sign that your vocabulary hasn't caught up with your thinking yet. You're thinking in complex, nuanced ideas, but your English vocabulary is still working with simple, basic words. So there's a gap between what you want to say and what you're able to say quickly. And that gap is exactly what today's lesson is going to close. We're not going to teach you more grammar rules. We're going to give you the exact vocabulary, the advanced C1 to C2 level words that native speakers reach for automatically in the moments when you currently freeze. Here's why this method works better than just memorizing word lists. When you learn a word attached only to its dictionary definition, your brain stores it as abstract information, like a fact you memorize for a test. But when you learn a word attached to a real situation, a meeting where you needed to disagree politely, an interview where you needed to sound confident, a conversation where you needed to admit you were wrong. Your brain stores that word as a tool, something you reach for automatically because it's tied to a memory, a feeling, a specific moment. That's the difference between knowing a word and owning a word. Today, we're going to make sure you own every single word we cover, because every one of them will come with a real scene, a real conversation, and a real reason to use it. Let's begin with the vocabulary of hesitation itself. Because before we learn how to sound confident, it helps to know exactly how to describe what's happening when you're not. Picture this scene. You're in a team meeting. Your manager turns to you and asks what you think about the new project timeline. You open your mouth, and for a second, you falter. To falter means to hesitate or lose confidence while you're in the middle of doing something, especially speaking or acting. It's a small movement backward, a stumble in your momentum. You could say, she faltered for a moment before answering, unsure of how honest to be. Notice how much more precise this is than just saying, she stopped. Faltering carries the emotional weight of uncertainty. Let's practice the sound of it together. Falter. Say it with me slowly. Falter. Now a little faster, the way you'd actually say it in conversation. Falter. Good. Now use it in your own sentence about a time you faltered during a conversation. Related to faltering is another word, to waver. To waver. To waver means to move back and forth between two decisions. To be unstable in your opinion or your confidence. Where faltering is about the moment of hesitation itself, wavering is more about indecision that continues over time. You might say, his voice wavered as he tried to explain the mistake to his boss. Or, in a slightly different sense, I was wavering between accepting the job offer and staying at my current company. Do you hear the difference? Faltering is a stumble. Wavering is an ongoing back and forth. Both are useful, and native speakers use both constantly to describe uncertainty with much more color than simply saying unsure. Now, here's a phrase that almost every English learner needs because it describes exactly what happens in your head during that dangerous pause. To grasp for words. This means you're searching desperately for the right words to say, often failing to find them quickly. Picture someone in an interview, sweating slightly, trying to answer a difficult question, and you could narrate it like this. He grasped for words, but nothing felt quite right. This phrase is wonderfully visual. You can literally imagine hands reaching out, grasping at something just out of reach. And there's a related, even more common expression, to draw a blank. This means your mind goes completely empty, and you cannot remember or think of anything at all. I drew a blank when they asked me to name my biggest weakness. Let's do a quick shadowing round with these two phrases. I'll say each phrase slowly, then at natural speed, and I want you to repeat immediately after me, copying my rhythm exactly. Grasp for words. Grasp for words. Draw a blank. Draw a blank. Now let's put them into a full sentence and shadow that too. I completely drew a blank and just grasped for words for what felt like forever. Repeat that whole sentence after me now, matching my pace as closely as you can. Let's add one more essential word to this hesitation cluster. Tongue-tied. This is a wonderfully descriptive adjective. That means you're unable to speak clearly because you're nervous, embarrassed, or overwhelmed with emotion. Imagine meeting someone you deeply admire, and you simply cannot form a proper sentence. I got completely tongue-tied when I met the CEO at the conference. Now, let's visualize a scene together, because this is exactly the kind of situation where these words come alive. Imagine you're standing in a hotel lobby during a business conference. The air smells faintly of coffee and fresh flowers from the reception desk. Across the room, you spot the CEO of your company, someone you've admired for years, but never spoken to directly. Your heart starts beating a little faster as she walks toward you and extends her hand. Let's build a short conversation from that scene. The CEO says, "You must be from the marketing team. I've heard great things about your recent campaign." You reply, but you're nervous. So let's practice sounding natural even under pressure. You could say, "Thank you so much. That really means a lot. I have to admit, I'm a little tongue-tied right now. I've wanted to meet you for a long time." She laughs and says, "Don't worry, I get that a lot. So tell me, what's been the biggest challenge with the campaign so far?" Now here's where I want you to try something. Pause this video for a moment and answer her question yourself, out loud, as if you were really standing there. Use at least one of today's new words if you can. Go ahead. I'll wait. Good. Now let's continue the imagined conversation, because this is exactly the kind of extended dialogue that will train your brain far more effectively than short, disconnected sentences. You answer her question about challenges, and she nods thoughtfully. Then she asks, "And how did your team manage to stay on schedules despite that?" You respond, explaining your team's approach. She smiles and says, "That's impressive. A lot of people would have faltered under that kind of pressure." You reply, thanking her, and she finishes with, "Well, I look forward to seeing what you do next. Keep up the great work." Notice how this conversation had 6 full exchanges, moved naturally from introduction to a real discussion, and used our vocabulary organically within it, exactly the way a real conversation would unfold, not as a rigid list of question and answer pairs. Let's shift now to the vocabulary of confidence, because once we understand hesitation, we nod the tools to move beyond it. The opposite of faltering is a word you'll hear constantly in professional English. Assertive. To be assertive means to express your opinions and needs clearly and confidently without being aggressive or rude. It's a beautiful balance point between passive and pushy. She gave an assertive response, making it clear she disagreed with the plan, but she did it respectfully. Notice the phrase, "but she did it respectfully." That's key, because assertive is not the same as aggressive. Aggressive would involve anger or hostility. Assertive simply means clear, direct, and confident. Next, a word that sounds almost like a description of a mountain, but actually describes a person's determination. Resolute. To be resolute means to be firm and unwavering in your decisions or your purpose. Think of someone who has made up their mind and will not be shaken. Despite the criticism, he remained resolute in his decision to launch the product early. Here's a small but important nuance. Resolute usually describes someone's mindset or determination about a decision they've already made, while assertive describes how someone communicates in the moment. You can be resolute internally in your thinking and assertive externally in your speech. Let's practice the connected speech and rhythm of these words together. Because pronunciation matters just as much as meaning when it comes to sounding natural. Say this sentence slowly with me first. She was resolute and assertive throughout the entire negotiation. Now listen to how a native speaker would actually say this at natural speed, where was resolute often blends together slightly, almost like was, res, lute, with the stress landing hard on the second syllable of resolute. Try it again, faster this time. She was resolute and assertive throughout the entire negotiation. Good. Notice, too, how the word and almost disappears in fast, natural speech, becoming just a quick N sound, connecting the two adjectives, resolute N, assertive. This is exactly the kind of natural reduction that makes native speech sound smooth. And it's something we'll come back to throughout this lesson. Now here's a word pair that will instantly upgrade the way you describe someone's calm confidence. Composed and poised. To be composed means to remain calm and in control of your emotions, especially in a stressful situation. Even after the microphone failed in the middle of her speech, she stayed remarkably composed. Poised is closely related, but adds a layer of elegance and physical grace to that calmness. Someone who is poised seems naturally graceful, controlled, and self-assured, almost as if nothing could disturb them. He walked into the interview poised and confident, as if he'd done this 100 times before. Let's use these in a workplace scene. Imagine a presentation is going badly. The projector isn't working. Half the slides are missing. And the room is getting restless. This is exactly the kind of pressure that separates people who falter from people who stay composed. Let's build a role play around this. Imagine you are the presenter. The technology has just failed in front of 20 colleagues. What do you say? A composed, poised response might sound like this. It looks like we're having a small technical issue. While we sort that out, let me walk you through the key points verbally, and we'll pull up the visuals as soon as we can. Notice there's no panic in that sentence. No apology overload. Just calm problem solving. Now I want you to try this yourself. Imagine you're standing in front of your own colleagues right now, and something has just gone wrong with your presentation. Pause the video and say your own composed response out loud. Really do it. Speaking it out loud, even alone in your room, builds the exact muscle memory you need for the real moment. Let's add 2 more words to our confidence vocabulary, because these next ones are extremely common in professional and social English. Self-assured and decisive. Self-assured. Self-assured describes someone who has quiet confidence in their own abilities and judgment without needing outside approval. She's remarkably self-assured for someone so early in her career. Decisive means someone who makes decisions quickly and confidently without unnecessary hesitation. A good leader needs to be decisive, especially when time is limited. These two often appear together when people describe strong leaders or confident professionals. So, let's practice a natural collocation, a decisive and self-assured leader. Say that phrase with me, matching the stress pattern. The stress falls on the second syllable of decisive, decisive, and on the first syllable of self-assured actually lands more on assured, self-assured. Try the full phrase again, a decisive and self-assured leader. Now, let's take a moment to slow down and talk about listening, because vocabulary alone won't make you fluent if you can't process fast, natural English when you hear it. One of the biggest challenges advanced learners face isn't understanding individual words, isn't handy individual talents. It's understanding connected speech, the way words blend, shorten, and flow into each other in real conversation. Let's take the sentence we just practiced. What are you doing today? In slow, careful speech, you'd hear every word clearly separated. What are you doing today? But in natural, fast conversation, native speakers compress this dramatically. It often sounds more like, "Whatcha doing today?" The words what and are and you blend into something closer to whatcha. Let's practice both versions together. Slow first. What are you doing today? Now fast and natural. Whatcha doing today? This kind of blending is called connected speech, and recognizing it is one of the biggest keys to understanding native speakers in real life, especially in movies, podcasts, and everyday conversation, where nobody speaks slowly and clearly for your benefit. Here's another common example using one of our confidence words. Is he going to be assertive about it? At natural speed, is he often blends into something closer to is he. So the sentence sounds more like, is he gonna be assertive about it? Let's slow it down first. Is he going to be assertive about it? Now at natural speed, is he gonna be assertive about it? I want you to notice something important here. Going to almost always becomes gonna in casual native speech, even among highly educated speakers in relaxed conversation. This isn't incorrect English. It's simply how spoken English naturally works, and understanding this will help you enormously when you're listening to real conversations, interviews, and podcasts rather than only scripted, slow contents. Let's move now into the vocabulary of professional communication, because knowing how to sound composed is only half the job. You also need the vocabulary to structure your ideas clearly, especially in meetings and presentations. Let's start with a word you've probably heard, but maybe haven't used confidently yourself. Articulate. Articulate. As an adjective, articulate describes someone who expresses their thoughts clearly and effectively. She's one of the most articulate speakers I've ever worked with. As a verb, to articulate means to express an idea or feeling clearly in words. He struggled to articulate exactly why The plan felt wrong to him. Notice the pronunciation difference. The adjective is pronounced art-ulit, with a shorter, softer ending, while the verb is pronounced articulate, with a longer, clearer final syllable. Let's practice both. Adjective first. Articulate, articulate. Now the verb, articulate, articulate. This is a fantastic C1, C2 word because it appears constantly in professional feedback, performance reviews, and descriptions of good communicators. Next, a word that upgrades the basic idea of short in a much more sophisticated way. Concise. To be concise means to communicate clearly using few words, without unnecessary detail. Please keep your report concise. The executives only have 10 minutes to review it. This is different from simply saying short, because concise implies that nothing important was lost. The message stayed clear and complete, despite being brief. Related to this is coherent, meaning your ideas are logically connected and easy to follow. His argument was coherent from start to finish, even though the topic was incredibly complex. A presentation can be concise, but not coherent, if it's short but confusing, and it can be coherent but not concise if it's clear but far too long. The ideal, of course, is both together. Let's practice this with a mini dialogue set in a meeting, complete with a role switch moment, because I want you to actually participate here, not just listen. Imagine the scene. You're in a conference room, laptops open, the smell of coffee in the air, and your manager has just asked the team for updates on a delayed project. MIDI in. Here's how the conversation begins. Manager. Okay, let's keep this brief. We have another meeting in 15 minutes. Can someone give me a concise update on where we stand? A colleague responds, Sure, I'll keep it short. We're about 2 weeks behind schedule due to the vendor delay, but the internal work is on track. Manager. Good, that's helpful. And is the client aware of the delay? Colleague. Yes, we informed them last week. They were disappointed but understanding. Now here's where I want you to switch roles with me. I'm going to be the manager, and you're going to answer as the team member. Ready? I'll ask, and what's our plan to get back on schedule? Now pause the video and answer that question yourself. Out loud, using at least one word from today's lesson if you can. Maybe articulate your plan concisely, or mention staying resolute despite the setback. Go ahead, take your time. Welcome back. Here's a sample answer you might compare your own response to. We're planning to add an extra developer to the project next week, which should let us catch up within about 10 days. I'm confident if we stay focused, we can deliver a coherent, high-quality product without cutting corners. Notice how that response was concise, but still coherent, still complete. That balance is exactly what advanced English speakers aim for in professional settings, and it's a balance you can absolutely reach with enough of this kind of practice. Let's add 2 more words to this professional cluster: persuasive and eloquent. To be persuasive means to be effective at convincing people to believe or do something. Her presentation was so persuasive that the entire board approved the budget increase immediately. Eloquent goes a step further, describing speech or writing that is not just clear, but beautifully and powerfully expressed. He gave an eloquent speech at the retirement dinner that left almost everyone in tears. Here's an important distinction. Persuasive focuses on the effect of the communication, whether it convinces people, while eloquent focuses on the quality and beauty of the language itself. You can be eloquent without necessarily being persuasive if your audience simply disagrees with your conclusion, despite loving how you expressed it. And you can be persuasive without being particularly eloquent if your argument is simply logical and well supported, even if the language itself isn't beautiful. Let's practice a piece of natural stress and intonation with these words, because native speakers place emphasis very deliberately in sentences like this. Listen to how I stress this sentence. That was, without question, the most eloquent and persuasive argument I've heard all year. Notice how eloquent and persuasive both receive strong stresses, while the smaller connecting words was, without, the, most, and are all spoken more quickly and quietly. This up and down pattern of stressed and unstressed words is what gives English its natural rhythm, sometimes called its musicality. Let's practice together. Say it with me, exaggerating the stress at first. That was, without question, the most eloquent and persuasive argument I've heard all year. Now try it again, more naturally, letting the rhythm flow. That was, without question, the most eloquent and persuasive argument I've heard all year. Before we move into our next block of vocabulary, I want you to take a small, quiet moment. Let's slow things down for about 30 seconds. Close your eyes if you're somewhere safe to do so, or simply soften your focus and take a slow breath in and a slow breath out. You've just learned 12 new advanced words in the last few minutes. Falter, waver, grasp for words, draw a blank, tongue-tied, assertive, resolute, composed, poised, self-assured, decisive, articulate, concise, coherent, persuasive, eloquent. That's actually 16, and your brain is doing real work right now storing them. Give yourself permission to feel proud of that. This is genuinely difficult, valuable learning, and you're doing it. Take one more slow breath, and when you're ready, let's continue. Let's now move into the vocabulary of emotional reactions under pressure, because this connects directly back to our original theme, that dangerous pause. Often, the pause happens not because we don't know the words, but because we're emotionally reacting to the situation itself. Let's start with flustered. To be flustered means to feel confused, nervous, or agitated, often because something unexpected happened quickly. He got completely flustered when the interviewer asked a question he hadn't prepared for. This word captures that mix of panic and confusion perfectly. A close cousin is rattled, meaning shaken or upset, often losing your composure because of a sudden shock or surprise. The unexpected criticism really rattled her, and she struggled to respond for the rest of the meeting. And a slightly stronger version is unnerved, meaning you've lost your confidence or courage because something has frightened or disturbed you. The sudden silence in the room unnerved him more than any direct criticism would have. Let's practice recognizing the emotional intensity ladder here, because these three words exist on a kind of scale. Flustered is the mildest, confused, a bit panicked, but recoverable. Rattled is stronger. You've been shaken, and it shows. Unnerved is the strongest of the three. Real fear or loss of confidence has crept in. Let's shadow all three together, paying attention to how the stress falls on the final syllable in each. Flustered, rattled, unnerved. Now again, a little faster, the way you'd hear them in natural conversation. Flustered, rattled, unnerved. Now let's balance this with the opposite side of the emotional spectrum. Words for staying calm under pressure. Unfazed means completely unaffected or undisturbed by something that would normally upset or surprise most people. Even after hearing the shocking news, she seemed completely unfazed. And nonchalant describes someone who appears casually calm and relaxed, sometimes almost to the point of seeming indifferent. He gave a nonchalant shrug when asked about the huge financial risk he'd taken. Here's an important nuance. Unfazed usually implies genuine inner calm, while nonchalant can sometimes suggest a performance of calmness, whether real or not. Someone can act nonchalant on the outside while actually feeling nervous on the inside, which is a very human, very relatable thing to describe. Let's build a longer role-play scene using this emotional vocabulary, because I want you to really feel these words in context. Picture this. You're at a job interview for a position you desperately want. The interviewer, without warning, says something unexpected. I have to be honest, your resume has a significant gap in it. Can you explain that? This is exactly the kind of moment that could leave you flustered or even rattled. Let's practice a strong response. You could say, "That's a fair question, and I appreciate you asking directly. I took 8 months off to care for a family member, and while it wasn't planned, I used part of that time to complete an online certification in project management." Men-genin. Notice how this response is composed and self-assured, not flustered, even though the topic was sensitive. Now, let's continue this interview conversation with several more exchanges. Because a single question and answer isn't enough to really practice fluency. The interviewer responds, "I appreciate your honesty. That's actually a very mature way to handle that time. How do you think that experience shaped you professionally?" You might answer, "Honestly, it taught me to stay resolute, even when circumstances change unexpectedly. I had to reorganize my entire life quickly, and that kind of adaptability has stuck with me. The interviewer continues. That's a great point. Now, switching topics slightly, how would you handle a situation where a colleague strongly disagreed with your approach in a meetings? 80. Meeting. Pause the video here and answer this question yourself, out loud, as though you were really in that interview chair. Try to use at least one emotional vocabulary word and one confidence word from today's lesson. Welcome back. Here's a sample response for comparison. I'd try to stay composed and actually listen carefully to their perspective before responding. Sometimes what seems like disagreement is really just a different angle on the same goal, and staying calm instead of getting rattled usually helps me find that common ground faster. The interviewer might finish with, "That's exactly the kind of thinking we look for here. Thank you for such a thoughtful answer." Notice how that entire exchange had 5 full turns, moved naturally through a real, slightly tense situation, and gave you multiple opportunities to actually produce spoken English yourself, rather than just listening passively. Let's take a short break from vocabulary blocks to talk specifically about the skill of shadowing, because I've been asking you to shadow phrases throughout this lesson, and I want to make sure you fully understand why this technique is so powerful. Shadowing means listening to a native speaker say something and repeating it immediately afterward, trying to copy not just the words, but the rhythm, the stress, the intonation, even the emotional tone. This is different from simple repetition because the goal isn't just to say the same words, Sue. It's to train your mouth and your ear to move the way a native speaker's does. When you shadow consistently, over weeks and months, something remarkable happens. Your natural speaking rhythm starts to shift, almost unconsciously, toward a more native-like flow. Let's do a slightly longer shadowing exercise together, using a mix of today's vocabulary. I'll say this sentence slowly first. Even though I was completely flustered, I forced myself to stay composed and articulate my answer clearly. Now listen at natural speed. Even though I was completely flustered, I forced myself to stay composed and articulate my answer clearly. Nishan, now it's your turn. Repeat it immediately after me, matching my pace as closely as you possibly can. Right now. Good work. Let's talk now about a related listening skill that's just as important as shadowing. Learning to catch the main idea when someone speaks quickly without needing to understand every single word. This is something many learners struggle with. Because there's a common belief that you need 100% comprehension to follow a conversation. That's simply not true. And honestly, even native speakers don't catch every word in fast conversation. What they do instead is listen for key words, tone, and context, and fill in the gaps naturally. Let's practice this skill directly. I'm going to say a fairly fast sentence, and instead of trying to catch every single word, I want you to focus only on the general meaning. Here it comes. Yeah. So basically what happened was the client got kind of rattled when the numbers came in lower than expected, but our team stayed pretty composed and just walked them through it. Now, even if you didn't catch every single word, could you tell me the general idea? The client was upset about lower numbers, but the team stayed calm and explained things. That's exactly the skill. Catching the gist, not every word. And here's a small trick that native speakers use constantly when they're not catching everything. Natural filler responses like, I see, that makes sense, or right, which keep the conversation flowing smoothly, even when you're processing information quickly. Let's practice those responses together. I see. That makes sense. Right. These tiny phrases are incredibly powerful tools because they buy you thinking time while still sounding fully engaged in the conversation. Now let's move into another essential vocabulary cluster. The language of honesty and directness, because this connects beautifully to real professional and social situations where you need to say something difficult, delicate, or unexpected. Let's begin with candid. To be candid means to be honest and direct, especially about something that might be uncomfortable to say. It's, can I be candid with you? I don't think this plan is going to work. This word carries a certain respectful bluntness. It signals that honesty is coming, and it's often used as a polite warning before delivering difficult feedback. Closely related is forthright, meaning direct and honest in a straightforward, sometimes almost blunt way, but without unnecessary rudeness. I appreciated how forthright she was about the company's financial struggles. Now, let's contrast this with a word describing a very different communication style. Diplomatic. To be diplomatic means to handle difficult or sensitive situations with tact and care, often to avoid upsetting people. He gave a diplomatic answer that avoided directly criticizing anyone. And closely related, tactful, meaning sensitive and careful in how you communicate difficult truths, choosing your words to minimize hurt. She found a tactful way to tell her colleague his idea wouldn't work. Here's an interesting nuance worth understanding. Candid and forthright are about the content of what you say, being direct and honest, while diplomatic and tactful are about the delivery, how carefully and gently you say it. In reality, the best communicators are often candid and diplomatic at the same time. Honest in substance, careful in delivery. Let's contrast these with two words describing less effective communication styles: blunt and evasive. To be blunt means to speak very directly, sometimes too directly, without much concern for softening the message. His feedback was so blunt that a few people in the meeting looked genuinely hurt. Blunt isn't necessarily bad, but it lacks the careful delivery of tactful or diplomatic. On the opposite end, to be evasive means to deliberately avoid giving a direct or honest answer. often to dodge an uncomfortable topic. When I asked about the budget cuts, he was strangely evasive, changing the subject twice. Evasive almost always carries a negative connotation, suggesting the person is hiding something or avoiding responsibility. Let's practice these 6 words with a mini role play involving a difficult workplace conversation. And this time, let's do the visualization first, the way we've been practicing throughout this lesson. Picture this scene. You're sitting across from a colleague in a quiet corner of the office, away from everyone else's desks. There's a slightly awkward tension in the air because you need to tell them something they won't want to hear. Their part of a shared project has fallen behind, and it's affecting the whole team's deadline. You take a breath and begin. You say, "Hey, do you have a minute? I want to be candid with you about something." Your colleague replies, a little nervously, "Sure, of course. What's up?" You continue. Your section of the report is about a week behind, and honestly, it's starting to affect the rest of the team's timeline. Your colleague responds, "Oh, I didn't realize it was that noticeable. I've been struggling to get the data I need from the finance team." You reply, "That makes sense, and I appreciate you being upfront about that instead of being evasive about it. Is there anything I can do to help speed things up?" Your colleague answers, "Actually, yes. If you could help me follow up with finance directly, that would save me a lot of time." You finish, "Absolutely. I'll reach out today. Thanks for being so open about this. I know it's not always easy." Notice this dialogue had 6 complete exchanges, opened with a visualization of the scene, and used 4 of our 6 new words naturally within a real, emotionally realistic conversation. Exactly. The depth of practice that makes vocabulary truly stick. Let's pause again for a quick phonetics moment, because I want to point out something about how want to and going to naturally reduce in fast speech, since you'll hear this constantly in real conversations. In the sentence, "I want to be candid with you," native speakers very often compress "want to" into "wanna." So it sounds like, "I want to be candid with you." Let's practice both versions, slow and careful. "I want to be candid with you." Fast and natural. "I want to be candid with you." This reduction happens so often in casual and even semi-professional spoken English that recognizing it instantly will dramatically and improve your listening comprehension in real conversations, podcasts, and interviews. We've covered an enormous amount of ground already. Hesitation vocabulary, confidence vocabulary, professional communication vocabulary, emotional reaction vocabulary, and honesty and directness vocabulary, along with several rounds of shadowing, role play, and connected speech practice. You're doing incredibly well. If you've stayed with me this far, actively speaking out loud during the pauses rather than just listening passively. In the next part of this lesson, we're going to move into the vocabulary of thinking and decision-making. we'll do a full role play set in a completely different scenario, a spontaneous social situation, and then we'll build toward our big fluency round at the end, where we bring every single word from this lesson together into one continuous flowing practice. For now, that's the first part of today's masterclass. Let's move into the vocabulary of thinking and decision-making. Why? Because this cluster connects directly to what's happening inside your mind during that dangerous pause before the words even reach your mouth. Let's begin with a verb you'll want to reach for constantly. To formulate. To formulate a thought or an idea means to develop and express it clearly and precisely, often after some careful thinking. Give me a second to formulate my response. This is a complicated question. Notice how naturally this fits into that exact pause we've been talking about all lesson. Instead of freezing silently, you can literally announce that you're formulating your thoughts, which sounds confident and intentional rather than lost or confused. Was. That's a small but powerful shift, turning silence into a controlled professional pause. Related to this is a phrase we touched on briefly earlier, but deserve deeper attention. To articulate one's thoughts. This combines a word we already learned with a very natural collocation. It took her a moment to articulate her thoughts, but once she did, the whole room understood exactly what she meant. Let's also add to process, meaning to think through and understand information, often taking a moment to absorb something before responding. That's a lot of information. Give me a moment to process it. This is one of the most useful phrases in this entire lesson because it gives you permission in a completely natural, native-sounding way to pause without seeming unprepared. Instead of standing there silently and awkwardly, you simply say, "Let me process that for a second," and suddenly your pause becomes intentional, professional, even impressive. Let's contrast two words that describe very different styles of thinking: intuitive and deliberate. To be intuitive means to understand or decide something quickly, based on instinct or feeling, without consciously reasoning through it step by step. She made an intuitive decision to change the marketing strategy, and it turned out to be exactly right. Deliberate, when used as an adjective describing thinking, means careful, slow, and intentional, the opposite of rushed or instinctive. He's a deliberate thinker. He never rushes into decisions without weighing every option first. Notice the pronunciation shift here too. As an adjective, deliberate is pronounced deliberate, with a shorter final sound, while as a verb it becomes deeber, heat, with longer final syllable, similar to the articulate pattern we practiced earlier. Let's shadow both forms together. Deliberate, the adjective, it. Deliberate, the verb, it. And one more related word, instinctive, meaning based on natural instinct rather than conscious thought, very close in meaning to intuitive, but slightly more physical or automatic in feeling. His instinctive reaction was to apologize immediately, even though it wasn't his fault. Let's add one final phrase to this cognitive cluster, one that's incredibly common in natural spoken English. To mull over something. This means to think about something carefully and slowly over a period of slowly, mind turn. Turning it over in your mind before reaching a conclusion. I need some time to mull over this decision before I give you an answer. This phrase has a slower, more relaxed feeling than formulate or process, which suggests active, immediate thinking. Mulling over something suggests a longer, more reflective kind of thinking, like something you do overnight or during a quiet walk. Let's build a scene around this cognitive vocabulary, and let's make it a spontaneous, social situation this time, rather than another workplace scenario, because I want you to see how naturally these words fit into everyday life too, not just professional settings. Picture this. You're at a friend's birthday dinner, seated around a long wooden table at a busy restaurant, string lights hanging overhead, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses all around you. Someone you've just met, a friend of a friend, turns to you and asks, out of nowhere, so, if you could instantly become an expert in any skill, what would you pick? This is exactly the kind of spontaneous question that can trigger that dangerous pause, because you genuinely haven't thought about it before. Here's how you might respond using our new vocabulary. Oh, that's a great question. Let me actually mull that over for a second. Okay. I think I'd want to be an incredible public speaker. I've always admired people who can formulate their thoughts so clearly under pressure. Notice how natural and confident that sounds, even though you're openly admitting you needed a moment to think. The vocabulary itself transforms hesitation into something that sounds thoughtful rather than unprepared. And continue. Let's continue this dinner conversation with several more exchanges, building it out the way a real conversation would naturally flow. The new acquaintance responds, "That's such a good answer. I never thought about it that way. Public speaking terrifies me, honestly." You reply, "Really? What is it about it that feels so intimidating?" They answer, "I think it's the fear of getting flustered in front of everyone and just freezing up." You respond, "That's so relatable. But honestly, I think most people are more forgiving of a little hesitation than we assume. It's actually kind of endearing when someone's being candid about not having a perfect answer ready." They laugh and say, "That's a really comforting way to think about it, actually." Notice this conversation, again, had 5 complete exchanges, opened with a vivid visualization, and wove in 5 different vocabulary words naturally, without ever feeling like a rigid vocabulary quiz. Now, here's where I want to use the role switching technique again, because active production is far more valuable than passive listening. I'm going to play the role of the curious dinner guest, and I want you to answer as yourself. Ready? Here's my question. Okay, your turn. If you had to instantly master a completely new skill overnight, what would it be and why? Pause the video now and answer out loud in full sentences, trying to use at least one cognitive vocabulary word like mull over, intuitive, or formulate. Take your time. There's no rush. Welcome back. However you answered, notice how it felt to actually produce spoken English in real time under a small bit of pressure, rather than simply reading along silently. This is exactly the skill we're building throughout this entire lesson. Not passive recognition of vocabulary, but active, spontaneous production. The ability to reach for these words automatically, the way native speakers do. Let's move now into a vocabulary cluster specifically about spontaneity and improvisation. Since we've just been discussing an unplanned, unexpected question, let's begin with the verb to improvise, meaning to create or do something without preparation, using whatever's available in the moment. When the main speaker canceled last minute, she had to improvise an entire presentation on the spot. The related adjective is spontaneous, describing something done without planning, arising naturally in the moment. It was a completely spontaneous decision. We just decided to book flights that same afternoon. Notice these two words work beautifully together. You improvise an action, and the result, or the decision itself, is described as spontaneous. Let's practice the connected sound of a natural sentence using these words. I had to improvise. It was completely spontaneous. At natural speed, had to often blends into something closer to hadda, so it sounds like I hadda improvise. It was completely spontaneous. Let's practice the slow version first. I had to improvise. It was completely spontaneous. Now the fast, natural version, I hadda improvise. It was completely spontaneous. This kind of reduction, had to, becoming hadda, similar to want to becoming wanna, and going to becoming gonna, is one of the most common patterns in fast, casual English, and recognizing this pattern across different verbs will help you understand native speakers far more easily in real unscripted conversation. Let's do one more full role play. Before we take a short break, this time practicing a job interview scenario built specifically around spontaneity, since interviewers often deliberately ask unexpected questions to see how candidates handle pressure. Let's visualize the scene first. You're sitting in a small, modern office, sunlight streaming through tall windows, a glass of water on the table in front of you, and the interviewer, calm and observant, has just closed her laptop and leaned back slightly in her chair. She says, I want to ask you something a little different now, just to see how you think on your feet. If our biggest client called right now and said they were canceling their contract due in the next 5 minutes, what would you do in the next 5 minutes? This is a fantastic example of a question designed specifically to test how you handle unexpected pressure. Exactly the moment where that dangerous pause tends to appear. Here's a strong response using our vocabulary. Great question. Honestly, my instinctive reaction would be to stay composed and immediately ask clarifying questions to understand exactly why they're canceling rather than reacting emotionally. I'd want to formulate a calm, solution-focused response rather than improvising something desperate. The interviewer nods and continues. Good. And let's say the reason is that our product simply didn't meet their expectations. How would you handle that conversation? Pause the video here and respond yourself out loud, trying to use at least one word from our thinking and decision-making cluster and one from our spontaneity cluster. Welcome back. Here's a possible response for comparison. I'd want to be candid about acknowledging where we fell short without being defensive. I think being forthright about a mistake actually builds more trust than making excuses, and then I'd try to formulate a concrete plan to address their concerns directly. The interviewer might respond, "That's a very mature answer. I appreciate how deliberate and thoughtful that sounds, even under a hypothetical crisis." Notice, again, how many words from across this entire lesson naturally combined together in this single extended exchange. Resolute thinking, candid honesty, deliberate responses, all working together the way real, fluent English actually sounds. Let's take another short, quiet break because your brain has been working incredibly hard through 2 dense vocabulary blocks in a row. Let's slow down for about 20 or 30 seconds. If it's safe to do so, soften your gaze, relax your shoulders, and take one slow, deep breath in through your nose and let it out slowly through your mouth. You've now learned roughly 30 new advanced words and phrases in this lesson alone. That's genuinely a huge amount of vocabulary, and your brain needs these small moments of rest to actually consolidate what it's absorbing. Take one more breath, nice and slow, and when you're ready, we'll continue. Now, let's move into something a little different. A practical sensory self-training exercise, one that you can use even after this video ends to keep building fluency in your daily life without needing any video at all. Here's the technique. Wherever you are right now, I want you to look around the room and silently or out loud, if you're alone, describe your surroundings using some of today's vocabulary, connecting each object or feeling to a word we've learned. Let me demonstrate first. I'm sitting at my desk right now, and there's a slightly chaotic pile of notes beside my laptop. I could describe this feeling by saying, looking at this mess actually makes me want to formulate a better organizational system. Or, noticing the quiet hum of the room, I might say, it's a calm environment, the kind of space that makes it easy to stay composed while I work. Do you see how I'm not just describing objects, I'm connecting my environment to the exact vocabulary we've been practicing. Now it's your turn. Pause the video, look around wherever you are right now, and describe at least 3 things you notice: an object, a sound, and a feeling, using today's vocabulary naturally. It doesn't need to be perfect. The goal is simply to build the habit of reaching for these words in real, spontaneous moments, exactly the skill we've been training this entire lesson. Take your time. There's no rush at all. Welcome back. However that exercise went for you, I want you to know that this exact technique, describing your real environment using new vocabulary, is one of the most powerful habits you can build outside of any lesson or video. Zen. It turns every single day into practice, whether you're sitting at your desk, riding public transportation, or making dinner in your kitchen. Every object around you becomes an opportunity to formulate a sentence, to practice being articulate, to stay resolute in building this daily habit, even when progress feels slow. Let's now return to more phonetics and connected speech, because I want to make sure your listening skills are developing just as much as your vocabulary. Let's look at a very common pattern involving the word have to, which often reduces to something sounding like hafta in fast, natural speech. Consider this sentence: I have to be diplomatic about this, even though I really want to be blunt. At natural speed, this often sounds like, I have to be diplomatic about this, even though I really want to be blunt. Let's practice the slow version first. I have to be diplomatic about this, even though I really want to be blunt. Now the natural, fast version. I have to be diplomatic about this, even though I really want to be blunt. Notice how 2 reductions happen in the very same sentence. Have to becomes have to, and want to becomes wanna. This kind of double reduction is extremely common in real, natural English, and recognizing it instantly, rather than being confused by it, is a genuine marker of advanced listening comprehension. Let's also talk briefly about intonation patterns in questions, because this is something many learners get slightly wrong, me even at an advanced level. In English, most direct yes or no questions rise in pitch at the end. Are you feeling more confident now? Notice how my voice rises on the final word, now. But open-ended questions, the kind that start with words like what, why, or how, usually fall in pitch at the end, sounding more definite and complete. What would you say in that situation? Notice how my voice falls slightly on situation rather than rising. Let's practice both patterns together. Rising intonation first. Are you feeling more confident now? Now, falling intonation. What would you say in that situation? This distinction might seem small, but getting it right dramatically improves how natural and native-like your spoken English sounds. And getting it wrong, even with perfect vocabulary and grammar, can make your speech sound slightly robotic or uncertain. We've now built an enormous vocabulary foundation together across this lesson. Hesitation words. confidence words, professional communication words, emotional reaction words, honesty and directness words, cognitive and decision-making words, and spontaneity words. In the next and final part of today's masterclass, we're going to cover our last vocabulary cluster, focused specifically on fluency and flow itself. The words that describe smooth, natural speech, as well as its opposite. Then we'll build toward one final extended role play, a truly spontaneous, unscripted feeling scenario that pulls together nearly everything we've learned. And finally, we'll do our complete fluency round, where we rapidly review every single word from this entire lesson in quick succession, followed by your specific, measurable challenge for today. Type 1 to continue whenever you're ready. And we'll keep building from exactly where we left off. Let's move into our final vocabulary cluster of today's lesson. The vocabulary of fluency and flow itself, because this is the language that describes exactly what we've been building toward this entire time. Let's begin with the word fluent itself, though we should push past this basic term into more advanced, precise alternatives. A wonderful upgrade is the word seamless, meaning smooth and continuous with no noticeable breaks, gaps, or interruptions. Her transition between topics was completely seamless. You'd never have known. She hadn't prepared that exact question. This word works beautifully to describe speech that flows without those dangerous pauses we've spent this whole lesson discussing. Let's contrast this with two words describing the opposite. Halting and disjointed. Halting describes speech that stops and starts repeatedly, moving slowly and with obvious hesitation. His halting explanation made it clear he hadn't thought this through in advance. Disjointed describes speech or writing where the ideas don't connect logically or smoothly, jumping around in a way that's hard to follow. The presentation felt disjointed, like several unrelated ideas stitched together without any real connection. Notice the difference. Halting describes the physical rhythm of speech, the stopping and starting. Ye saw bam. While disjointed describes the logical structure, whether ideas connect coherently. Let's add two final phrases to complete this cluster. Mot. Coherent flow and natural cadence. We've already learned coherent, meaning logically connected, but paired with flow, it becomes a specific, powerful phrase describing ideas that move smoothly from one to the next. Once she found her coherent flow, the entire presentation became genuinely engaging. And cadence refers to the natural rhythm and rise and fall pattern of spoken language, almost like the music of speech itself. He has such a natural cadence when he speaks. It's almost hypnotic to listen to. This is a beautifully advanced, slightly poetic word, perfect for describing exactly the kind of smooth, confident speaking rhythm we've been training throughout this entire lesson. Let's shadow this final vocabulary cluster together, moving from slow to natural speed. Seamless, halting, disjointed, coherent flow, natural cadence. Now again, at natural conversational speed, seamless, halting, disjointed, coherent flow, natural cadence, excellent work. Now, let's build our final, extended role play of today's lesson. And this time, I want it to feel genuinely spontaneous, almost like we're pulling together every single vocabulary cluster from the entire video into one flowing, realistic conversation. Let's visualize the scene together. Imagine it's the end of a long workday. You're at a small networking event, standing near a window with a glass of sparkling water in your hand. City lights just beginning to twinkle outside. Someone from a completely different company approaches you, smiling, and says, "I don't think we've met yet. I'm Marcus." "What do you do?" You reply, introducing yourself and your work. Marcus responds, "That sounds fascinating, actually. Can I be candid? I've always wondered how people in your field handle really high-pressure moments, like presenting to a room full of executives who clearly don't agree with you." You answer, drawing on our confidence vocabulary. "Honestly, the biggest shift for me was learning to stay composed instead of getting rattled. The moment someone pushed back, I used to completely falter under that kind of pressure." Marcus continues, genuinely curious. "That's so relatable. What changed for you?" You respond, "I think I just built the habit of formulating my thoughts calmly instead of grasping for words in the moment." It sounds simple, but it took real practice. Marcus laughs and says, "I love that. That's such a self-assured way to describe it. Honestly, I still get completely tongue-tied whenever I have to speak up in big meetings. Here's where I want you to switch roles with me one final time. I'll play Marcus, and I want you to respond as yourself, using as much of today's vocabulary as naturally as you can. Ready? Here's my line. So, what would you actually say to someone like me, who wants to sound more articulate and less flustered under pressure? Pause the video now and give your full answer out loud, taking as long as you need, really trying to pull together several words from across this entire lesson into one coherent, flowing response. Welcome back. Here's a sample response you might compare yours to. Honestly, I'd say start by giving yourself permission to pause on purpose. Instead of panicking when you draw a blank, just say something like, "Let me mull that over for a second," and use that moment to formulate a clear, concise answer. Staying diplomatic doesn't mean staying silent. It just means being deliberate about how you say what you're thinking. The more you practice that, the more it becomes instinctive instead of terrifying. Marcus might respond, "That's genuinely one of the most eloquent explanations I've ever heard for something that always felt so overwhelming. Thank you, seriously." Notice this final role play wove together words from nearly every single vocabulary cluster we've covered today. Hesitation, confidence, cognition, honesty, and fluency, all inside one natural, flowing, six-exchange conversation exactly the way real English actually works. Now, let's move into our fluency round, the final, high-energy section of today's lesson, where we rapidly review every single word and phrase we've learned, back to back, without stopping, to help cement all of it firmly into your active vocabulary. I'm going to say each word or phrase quickly, and I want you to say it right along with me, out loud, matching my pace as closely as you can right now. Ready? Here we go. Falter, waver, grasp for words, draw a blank, tongue-tied, assertive, resolute, composed, poised, self-assured, decisive, articulate, concise, coherent, persuasive, eloquent, flustered, rattled, unnerved, unfazed, nonchalant, candid, forthright, diplomatic, tactful, blunt, evasive, formulate, process, intuitive, deliberate, instinctive, mull over, improvise, spontaneous, seamless, halting, disjointed, coherent flow, natural cadence. That's nearly 40 advanced, C1 to C2, level words and phrases all connected to real everyday situations, meetings, interviews, dinner conversations, unexpected questions, and the dangerous pause that happens right before you speak. Say them one more time with me, even faster this time, really pushing your fluency. Falter, waver, grasp for words, draw a blank, tongue-tied, assertive, resolute, composed, poised, self-assured, decisive, articulate, concise, coherent, persuasive, eloquent, flustered, rattled, unnerved, unfazed, nonchalant, candid, forthright, diplomatic, tactful, blunt, evasive, formulate, process, intuitive, deliberate, instinctive, mull over, improvise, spontaneous, seamless, halting, disjointed, coherent flow, natural cadence. Genuinely excellent work. Now here's your specific, measurable challenge for today, and I want you to actually do this, not just nod along and move on with your day. Before you go to sleep tonight, I want you to write one comment below this video in English, using at least 3 words from today's lesson in a single, real sentence about your own life. Maybe it's about a time you faltered in a meeting, a moment you had to stay composed under pressure, or a situation where you wish you'd been more articulate instead of tongue-tied. It doesn't need to be long or perfect. It just needs to be real, and it needs to use words you learned today actively in your own context, because that active use is exactly what transforms passive recognition into genuine, lasting fluency. And here's a second challenge, one you can start using immediately, even in the next hour of your day. The next time you feel that dangerous pause coming, that moment where your mind goes blank and you don't know what to say, I want you to reach for one specific phrase from today. Let me formulate that properly. Say it out loud, or even just think it silently. And notice how it transforms a moment of panic into a moment of calm, intentional control. Moz, that single phrase alone can change the way you experience hesitation in English permanently. Before we finish today, I want to genuinely acknowledge how much work you've just done. This wasn't a passive video where you simply listened and nodded along. You spoke out loud multiple times. You answered spontaneous questions under simulated pressure. You practiced connected speech, natural reductions, rising and falling intonation, and rhythm and stress patterns. You built real vocabulary attached to real, emotional, memorable situations, not abstract definitions. That is genuinely advanced language learning. And if you stayed with me through this entire lesson, actively participating rather than just watching, you should feel proud of the effort you just put in. If today's masterclass helped you, please subscribe to Natural Word English because we publish lessons like this regularly, always built around real vocabulary, in real C1 to C2 level contexts, never abstract lists you'll forget by tomorrow. And remember your challenge. Write one comment below using at least 3 of today's words in a real sentence about your own life. I'll be reading them, and I genuinely love seeing how you connect this vocabulary to your own experiences. Thank you so much for practicing with me today. Keep formulating your thoughts with confidence. Keep staying composed under pressure. And most importantly, keep speaking, even when that pause feels dangerous. I'll see you in the next lesson.